morning, everyone. Morning. Well, we have an exciting time this morning. We have a world-renowned speaker, Professor Sachs, with us. He needs no introduction, actually. We have seen him on all of the speakers. We have seen also his YouTube channels. We have seen his talks, conferences. He is a very accomplished economist, interested in many areas of economics and also political economy. The CV of, the short CV of Professor Sachs is inside. It's on this flyer which we have circulated. But I just want to pick up a few things, and that is, Professor Sachs was at Harvard for many years, and then he left for Columbia, where he was a director of the Earth Institute, and he was also president of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, co-chair of the Council of Engineers for Energy Transition, and a commissioner of the United Nations Broadband Commission for Development. He has also advised United Nations Secretaries Generals, beginning with Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, and Antonio Guterres. Closer to home, he has visited Sunway University as a distinguished professor, and he also received the Penny Prize in Sustainable Development and a co-recipient of the 2015 Blue Planet Prize. He has also received 42 honorary degrees, 42. And his recent awards included the Legion of Honor from France and the Order of the Cross from Estonia. Even closer to home, the ASEAN Green Futures Project is a key initiative of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the Climate Works Center at Monash University, and also at the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development at Sunway University. The ASEAN Green Futures Project, which brings together think tanks across Southeast Asia, focuses on developing capacity for quantitative and qualitative climate policy analysis and charting net zero emission pathways in ASEAN that support the strategic foresight of policymakers here. Now, for the Singapore team, our researchers at the Economic Growth Center have participated quite actively, attended the meeting, overseas workshops, made the presentation over the last 2 years. The research team from the Economic Growth Center completed phase 1 and phase 2, which encompasses the simulation and least cost optimization of potential decarbonization pathways for Singapore. And the final report of the contribution to this project can be found on the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network website. So I want to say that we are very much interested in Professor Sachs, not just his talks, but also his works as well, in which he champions with great drive the sustainable development, climate change issues of the world. Now this morning we are going to have not a speech from Professor Sachs, but rather a dialogue with Professor Sachs. Many of you, I'm sure, are interested in asking questions, making comments, and having this important dialogue with Professor Sachs. I've asked my colleague, Professor Eko Riyanto, to chair this dialogue. Professor Riyanto is a well-known behavioral economist. He has worked on financial issues as well, especially experimental assets markets, and he is basically an applied microeconomist. Of course, Professor Eko, many of us would know him because he's associated with NTU, and he's the chair of our school, and he's going to chair this dialogue for the next 90 minutes. So may I invite Professor Sachs and Professor Eko to sit on the chair there. Be comfortable. We have colleagues and students from the other universities with us, from the US, from SUSS, SUTD, SMU, they're all amongst you all. So this is basically a tertiary gathering, fraternity, and we hope this will be a very productive session. So Eko, I hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Euston. Warm welcome to Professor Sachs, and very warm welcome to all of you here. So today's sessions, as Euston mentioned, is not really like a public lecture, but rather, I would say, conversational. Think of it as an open and frank discussions rather than formal lectures. So, and we all know that Professor Sachs is known for his candor and clarity. So I encourage everyone here to listen closely and think of their own questions and ask the questions to Professor Sachs here. So my role as the chair here is to ensure that we cover a lot of ground and also dig deeper while still maintaining alignment with the spirit of this dialogue. And as a privilege of the chair, I can ask the first question, so I will ask the first question. And this is something that in everyone's mind, this is about AI. So the question that I have is that I remember that you've drawn parallel between AI and past technological revolutions, noting its potential to, quote and unquote, reshape societal and economic landscape. So at the same time, there is a real worry that AI could widen the gap between the global north and south. And the benefit will concentrate only in a few wealthy countries. Now, how do you see AI progress influencing the economic divide between rich and poor nations? And do you think that developing countries are at risk being left behind in this AI race? And what should us global community do to actually mitigate this global divide?
Thank you very much. Great to be with everybody, and really privileged and delighted to be having this dialogue with all of you. You started with a big question, maybe the biggest and hardest. When major technological changes occur, societies change in very fundamental ways. How people live, how the income and wealth are distributed, where people live, what they do with their daily lives, how political power is shaped. And my assumption, along with I think all of us, is that AI combined with other digital technologies, with connectivity, with computation, is a very radical general purpose technology that will change every part of our society, our politics, our economics, and that the future is yet to be written on this. If you think about the major episodes of technological change in recent history, the advent of the steam engine at the end of the 18th century was the great breakthrough that enabled the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution changed the whole world in countless ways. We know that the Industrial Revolution first privileged one part of the world, starting with England, and then Britain, Western Europe, especially Germany in the second half of the 19th century, and the United States, and towards the end of the 19th century, Japan in Asia. So the first effect was major changes of productivity, scale of economy, and changes of geopolitical significance that were transformative, revolutionary, and at global scale. Internal to societies, the steam engine had huge impacts. First, it was the most important agent of urbanization, because societies were largely rural, overwhelmingly rural in most places, with the exception of Britain and the Netherlands, which were still predominantly rural until the end of the 18th century. And by the middle of the 19th century, Britain was an urban society, and that came because of the technological revolution. I'm using the steam engine as shorthand, of course, because the Industrial Revolution was about mechanization of the textile mills. It was about the expansion of the steel industry, but without the steam engine, it would not have taken place. That was the great unleasher of the energy that is needed for a modern economy, and there was no way to achieve a modern economy on a so-called organic energy system based on human and animal power and a bit of wind and water mills. So we had urbanization. Urbanization, of course, had profound consequences for society. The rural-urban divide widened and created revolutions, political change, great strife, urbanizing society from the late 18th century till today has been one of the great challenges and transformations. We also had profound changes of income distribution. Of course, the rise of the bourgeoisie, ownership of capital as opposed to land was the canonical change of the 19th century. Very real, very dramatic. And the question of income distribution was also very dramatic. It's probably right to say that for the first half of the 19th century, the working class lived in rather miserable conditions. Factory, pollution, hard physical labor, and probably lower quality of life and living standards than rural England in, say, the middle of the 18th century. In the second half of the 19th century, living standards rose. But in the first half, by 1848, you had the Communist Manifesto based on the sense that the proletariat, the new industrial working class, had declining living standards. So this is relevant also because no doubt British output rose significantly, and no doubt the distribution of that output changed significantly. The share of labor fell, and the returns to capital rose. And so you had a larger pie sliced differently, and probably absolute immiserization of part of society at the same time that you had the greatest economic growth on a sustained basis in history. So this is also a telltale sign for us. Industrialization eventually gave privilege to educated and skilled workers, and that drove the demand for education, and that drove the supply of education by states. And by the second half of the 19th century, research and development became a consequent function of government, largely, well, I was going to say at the invention of Germany, which created the technical universities first. But it's also fair to say that Britain already, with the Royal Society, which was founded in 1660, had the idea of directed technological progress for society. Francis Bacon had that idea in 1606. He's probably the most important single thinker of economic transformation in the West in history. He's a little bit underrated, but he had the idea that technological advance would transform society. Now, in the 20th century, we had waves of important general purpose technology, the most important of which was electrification, applying Faraday's principles to creating power grids in cities and all that that entailed. And along with that, starting in the 1930s, brought forward the information age of computation, and then by even broadcasting and computation, and then by the 1960s and 1970s, communication of computers, and the invention of the internet, and mobile connectivity. So all adding up to a growing cascade of information revolution. And as we know, the idea of artificial intelligence, it was always part of futurist thinking, that machines would think like human beings. This goes back to the automated Turk that played chess in the Habsburg court, but of course there was someone hidden under the table that was moving the pieces, so it wasn't quite AI yet. And then Alan Turing, a singular genius, had the idea that with universal computation, it would be possible to make machines that could actually talk with you, and that became the Turing test. And John von Neumann gave us the architecture for computation with central processing and memory, and actually built the early computers, of course, during World War II. And as I'm sure everyone knows, these were huge rooms with vacuum tubes, and moths would get into the vacuum tubes and short circuit the computers, and so they had to be debugged all the time. And that debugging became part of our daily lives, figuratively. So this has been a cascading revolution that has been built over a century, I would say, a little bit less than a century, because I would date Alan Turing's great paper in 1936 as being the foundation of the AI revolution in real times, and then von Neumann and Shannon adding to the conceptualization of this in the 1940s. So it's been a long gestation, but it's also obviously taking place now at an accelerating pace, and very few people really anticipated this pace. Some did. Ray Kurzweil really got it right almost to the year, because when he wrote about the coming singularity, he said that by the second half of the 2020s we would have the singularity, and he was regarded as an exaggerator, I would say, very clever, but too fast by decades. But he's pretty much on target, and he's just written a book in 2024 called "The Singularity is Nearer," taking a victory lap for his prediction back in the year 2000. One of the points I want to make is that not only will AI transform our lives, and it already is doing so, it transformed my life fundamentally, or the digital world transformed my life, because the work from anywhere is now, at least personally for me, a real feature of life. And of course, I'm not alone in that. There is a significant part of society that can work from anywhere, in any part of the world, at any time. And that's a big change of life, and it will change how our cities are organized. It will change the rent on commercial buildings. It will change the use of our time in fundamental ways. I have no commuting time except arriving to Singapore or to Jakarta, but no daily commuting. And that is a principal use of time in our society up until now, and that will go away to a very large extent unless you like commuting. But you won't have to commute to do whatever it is we're actually going to be doing in the future. So these changes will have very big and profound effects, and we've seen that unfolding already, I would say, in the last 50 years, and should understand that. We haven't had AI exactly, but we've had servo mechanisms and automation dating back to the 1960s, really, at an operational scale. And the factories already started to empty out of people starting in the 1960s. So that phenomenon is not something brand new. When I look at it in the US context, we had a decline of our industrial workforce, especially the manufacturing workforce, from the peak in 1979 of 19 million workers. I don't recall the size of the labor force then, but it was significantly smaller than now, so that 19 million was relative to a smaller labor force, probably half of what it is today, which is 160 million workers in the US. And now the manufacturing sector is only 13 million. And while Donald Trump got elected in part by saying that China was to blame for that, or Mexico was to blame for that decline, it's not true. What was to blame for it is that you don't need workers in auto plants. The robots will do just fine. So this has been happening for quite a long time. And it affected the income distribution significantly because the share of labor in national income has declined from the mid-60s to the mid-50s in the US. The definitions matter in this, so when you look up different numbers, you may find slightly different patterns, but the share of labor in the US national income is down by about 10 percentage points. That has led to the kind of politics we have, which is a populism, an attack on globalization and so forth, an attack on the universities actually. So it's a kind of Luddite reaction, I would say, but not exactly in the form of smashing the machines, but maybe trying to attack the universities or and so forth. But it reflects the change in income and income distribution. So now I'm going to get to your question. The question is, what will AI mean for the future? Obviously, big changes, and in many spheres. And so we can only guess, first of all. My guess, broadly speaking, is that it will raise productivity significantly. In other words, we'll be able to do more per person significantly. But it will also dramatically change the income and wealth distribution. In general, it will lower labor income further, and it will raise capital income further. What kind of capital? Mainly, who owns the robots and who owns the AI systems. That will be the biggest ownership change. But human capital will also capture some of these returns, but in complicated ways, because a lot of what high human capital people do is precisely what ChatGPT 9.0 will do much better than us. ChatGPT 5.0 is already a pure competitor on many things. It is much better than I am at reviewing the economics journals and summarizing the most extant research. For me, that would take hours or days. For ChatGPT, it says thinking, 1 minute, 36 seconds, and it gives a better answer than I could give. And while there's mild hallucinations, I'm afraid I sometimes hallucinate also. It's actually quite good already, but it's going to get even better. So the returns to skills will change considerably. I spoke with Ray Kurzweil about this a few months ago. I think he's wrong, although he's very convincing, so we should listen to him. He said, no, it won't disempower workers. Everyone will just be better at what they do. And so it will raise all of our productivity and our returns. So in a technical production function, we have a more effective labor, each of us. I don't think this is right. I think rather it is substitution rather than complementarity to our labor. And we'll just have machines that get their PhDs in 1 hour, and they'll have 30 of them. And they'll be sitting at home with us, also doing the dishwashing and serving the coffee. And that this will come quite quickly, and it will really change what we do and how the market rewards what we do or what we don't do. So I think that there will be growing market inequality that's dramatic. The returns to labor will go down. The returns to capital will go up. I think we're already seeing this. The trend that I said for the last 50 years, I think, is accelerating. I think it's a little bit nerdy of Elon Musk to ask for a $1 trillion paycheck, but he might get it, actually. He really might get it, which is disturbing to me. Not something that is viable for society, actually, especially when these technologies will unemploy or disemploy a vast swath of the people in the United States. Of course, we're also seeing AI revolutionize war before our eyes. And the Ukraine war, I think, is continuing mainly so that both sides can try out their drones and their new AI systems. I think the Western countries want the war to continue because it's a good proving ground for Palantir and for others. I'm not exaggerating, by the way. It may not be put that way in their minds, but what is in their minds is don't give up. We can win this thing. We have this great innovation coming, and we need to try it out on the battlefield. So we have a technology war underway in Ukraine. Drones were not mentioned in the first few months. Then they became dominant. Now AI drones, AI smart systems, new weapon systems, maneuverable missile systems, all very smart targeting is quickly coming to the fore. In Gaza, the massacre in Gaza was very strongly AI supported. Almost all of the major US tech companies were heavily involved in this slaughter. They did so without compunction, without self-reflection. They are all on Pentagon contracts and Israeli Defense Force contracts. So the militarization of AI is, of course, very aggressive and accelerated. And a few years ago, I heard a discussion, something like this, of two NATO generals discussing how the whole game is to beat China in AI. The idea that there could be cooperation, or maybe we shouldn't militarize this, or maybe there shouldn't be an arms race in AI, was not mentioned once in a 2-hour discussion except by some idiot economist, that was me, who asked a question, and I was painfully dismissed from the room. Who is that awful person asking these wrong questions? Clearly we need an AI race. We don't need AI diplomacy. So the militarization is very significant. The change in the media, of course, we're already seeing. And it's very dramatic in many ways. I don't understand all of them, and I'm sure you understand better than I, but every day I have many websites put up with my voice and my name giving speeches I've never given. And we don't really know how to handle it because YouTube will take them down, but YouTube will do nothing to prevent them from going up. And under the laws written by Google, given to the US Congress for adoption, Google is completely protected against any claims because the content on YouTube is not the responsibility of the owner of the platform. It's only the responsibility of the provider of that specific content. So there's no legal recourse in the United States. Why is that? Well, that's also a feature that we know from history. Marx was absolutely right in this regard, which is the tendency of the dominant financial interests to own the democratic institutions. And so democracy is for sale. And in the United States, Silicon Valley basically owns Washington right now. And interestingly, it owns not only the White House and Congress, but also the Pentagon and the CIA, because not only is there the financing, but there's also the technology. Silicon Valley has the technology that the security state needs. The security state has been the dominant institution in America, but Silicon Valley even dominates the security state because the CIA just doesn't know how to do AI as well as Silicon Valley. And so this is being run out of California rather than out of Washington. That's very interesting. And that means that the legislation is also coming from California, meaning we will run the show. The most recent is the Genius Act, which is to empower digital private currencies. This is also part of the sphere of the state being taken over by private commercial interests without any real regulatory oversight. So the media are now highly concentrated in ownership. You have X, you have TikTok, which is an interesting case, by the way, because it was Chinese owned, and therefore showing things that Silicon Valley didn't want shown, like the massacres in Gaza. And so Congress and the White House insisted that it become American owned, that the media should not be out of control. And so it's becoming owned by the number 2 richest person in the world, Larry Ellison, given to his son as a gift, like Paramount was given to his son, and they now own CBS, they'll own TikTok, so they'll own major channels. So this is another transformation coming from AI, which is the extraordinary concentration of control over the media. And at least in the United States, in our world, by the way, your digital identity will be your predominant professional identity. And it will be cancelable. So they won't even have to disappear us into physical cells. Just turning off your internet will be enough. And that is coming, I'm sure. Right now, there still is an alternative media, at least in the United States. I'm not sure whether that will last or not, but that's another interesting development in all of this. So for me, the answer to the question is the changes will be profound. They will have the paradoxical effects of potentially solving a vast array of economic problems, healthcare, productivity in factories, management of infrastructure, better transport and traffic flow, and we can already see all of those improvements. But they will have the counterpart effect of an extraordinary concentration of power and wealth. That will vary by society. In some places, probably here and in China, it will be the government that will be the predominant controller, not the private sector. In the United States, it will be the private sector that controls the government much more. And so we're going to have different models of this. But this concentration of power, I'm inclined to think is unprecedented, because owning the steam engines gave you factories, and that gave you wealth, but it did not give you the media, it did not give you the military directly, it did not give you, it gave you the political system indirectly. But I think here, but it also didn't give you surveillance, the ability of control. So to my mind, what we're experiencing is probably unprecedented in the concentration of power in economic, financial, political, military, and social terms. So this is quite interesting. This is a big, big issue, and we're probably 20% of the way into this, or maybe 30% of the way. There is lots ahead.
Thank you very much for the very insightful. Now we can open, there's so many questions. I start with the first three questions, and two things, please introduce yourself and be brief, short, okay? So I'll start from the very in front here, Swati, Nick, and Swati.
Yeah, because hello, this is Swati from NTU. First off, professors, it is such a privilege to attend this event where you are present in person. Your work, your books, your online lecture have been such a motivation and inspiration for us. If I may request an insight on one rather simple but crucial issue, according to me. Most of the time, I feel that the world or countries are full of sustainability talks, but short on actions. From your experience, what would be that most underrated action that would make countries to move actually, or move at a much faster pace?
So you collect all the questions, and then...
Oh, then I should take some notes.
Okay.
Hold on.
Nick Hartley, Professor of Economics here at NTU. First of all, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Prof. Sachs for your being such a great advocate for measuring what matters, and that's human well-being. But my question is not relevant to that. My question is, I guess, on the mind of everyone here, and that is whether university education will become obsolete because of AI, and if not, how should we go forward from here?
Hi, Professor Jeffrey. Thanks for your sharing. Kai here from Public Policy and Global Affairs. Just a short question for myself. I think earlier you mentioned that 20-30% in terms of AI proliferation, if I understood that point correctly, what needs to happen for AI proliferation to reach 60-70% in society? Thank you.
Okay, so we have three. You want to start with three or?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the first question is what makes governments not only talk or agree to goals, but actually to act? And I'm sitting in a place that has acted. I think Singapore is, of course, it's not only exemplary in what has been accomplished here, but it's also a bit of a laboratory for all of us to understand how to do things. So study Singapore also in a comparative viewpoint, because there are a lot of lessons here for elsewhere. Of course, no doubt there are some lessons from elsewhere here, but Singapore teaches a lot about actually doing things that I think is very important and notable. In general, there are core political issues at stake in this question. Politics, for me, means collective action of a society. And so the question is what makes possible collective action and what makes it effective. And this is a question that has been asked for at least 2,300 years in print, because Plato asked that question in the Republic. And then Aristotle wrote an excellent book about this called The Politics, that invented political science in the Western world. And it's probably the best political science text I know until today, actually. So Aristotle had a knack for inventing fields and then for writing the textbook in those fields. And those textbooks lasted somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years as relevant. His physics isn't as relevant, but his books on ethics and politics are still probably the preeminent texts for our time. So the question, what makes governments act, involves three kinds of issues. One is the organization of collective action. So what form of polity is there? Singapore has had a top-down polity. It's been guided by a top-down set of institutions based on planning, foresight, and technocratic excellence. Probably this is closest to the philosopher king model of Plato, because the idea of Plato was that the only way to solve the problem of the polis, of the city-state, of the political community, was a philosopher who became a king, or a king who became a philosopher. And he tried to make a king a philosopher. During much of his life, he tried to advise kings of the kingdom of Syracusa, which is a city-state in Sicily now. And the first time he went to advise the king sold him into slavery, and he barely escaped with his life. And then the next two times he tried to advise the son of that king, Dionysius II, and the first time failed completely, and the second time there was a civil war. So Plato was a total failure as an economic political advisor, which gives me great thanks and confidence. Plato can fail, you can all fail, but we should also try. So the first is how to organize the polity. Should it be a democracy? Should it be a top-down state? Singapore has had some trappings of democracy, but it's mainly a top-down state. Extraordinarily effective, in my view. It has delivered for the people of this country more than almost any place on the planet, if not the singular success story. I used to think, by the way, that as Singapore's income was rising towards the US, that there would be convergence, but Singapore just kept going right through that limit, supposed limit, because we all thought convergence meant convergence to the US, but Singapore just kept sailing through that limit because it's got superior political organization, actually. So the first question is, does the political constitution in the general sense, not the written document, but in the actual functioning of collective action, deliver action? In the United States, the answer has been no for about 40 years. We've had no consequential reform of any single sort in the United States for 40 years. We have no national plans, no national vision, no national advances. The trains don't work. We have 0 kilometers of fast rail, and so forth, because there's no effective collective action in the United States now. And the political system does not lead to effective collective action. 2 points on this. How do you get effective collective action? First, in a complicated world, you need planning. So Singapore plans a lot. There are 5-year cycles. There are longer-term vision cycles. There are different plans for different parts of society. We don't have that in the United States, for example. This is quite interesting. We do not have a planning board. We do not have a planning ministry. We do not have an economy ministry. We literally have no place where economic planning gets done. None. Strange. And when I was trained, that was a great strength of the US model, supposedly. We were told, shut down planning ministries, they're awful. And this is one of the mistakes of page 1 of the basic economic textbooks, that the market will do all of this. Of course, a nonsense. So this is one piece, is the capacity to plan seriously. And the second piece is the capacity to mobilize the resources for the action needed. And that can mean a state that taxes and invests, or in the Singapore model, a central provident fund that raises a significant amount of private saving that then gets channeled into public infrastructure. But that is a kind of action that is extremely important, because public finance is the mobilization of resources for public goods. And that's a big puzzle of how best to do that. And Singapore's model is an extremely interesting model, because it's a blended finance model that finances the state through a forced private saving. And there are a lot of smart features of that system. A third part that is very important for action now is the action of multiple governments. So we are now at a time where the scale of action is no longer adequate, certainly not at the level of Singapore by itself, but it must be at a regional scale. And that's why the ASEAN summit in the last couple of days is very important, because Singapore cannot solve its green energy problem on its own. It has to import hydropower from Laos or some other large geographic grid. That's a complicated problem. And we're very bad at intergovernmental interstate cooperation, I mean. And this is one of the biggest obstacles to effective action. And just like the problem within a society of how to mobilize collective action is about managing conflicts or directing action from top down so that conflicts are put aside by a strong state, the same issue arises, of course, in the interstate relationship. And here, the great power politics is a major feature. The United States, well, let's just say from a technical level of energy systems or transport grid or trade and value chains, ASEAN should be very strongly connected with China. This is, from an economic point of view, obvious. It's the efficient solution. That's the neighbor. It's a giant neighbor. It's a giant market. The idea of the regional comprehensive economic partnership of ASEAN plus China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand is a good, very good idea. The United States is out to break that because the United States thinks it's in competition with China and therefore it should frustrate cooperation of other countries with China. What a mess. That's not trying to do something, that's trying to stop from doing something. So we have a lot of forces of rent-seeking or negative sum actions that impede collective action. And we need to overcome those negative sum directions in order to answer your question. That's true within a society, and it's true across states. And so that, how to solve those political problems is a major issue. Let me come back to the US scene just to say we have very powerful interest groups that impede decision-making. One of the most powerful is the big oil industry. You're blessed not to own any oil. If you own oil, gas, or coal, it drives your politics crazy because for 100 years that has been the dominant lobby up until Silicon Valley being the dominant lobby in the United States. But before it was the oil sector, which is still very powerful. So when Donald Trump says climate change is a hoax and drill baby drill, he's basically mouthing the interests that financed his power and financed his party's power. He's not absolutely as vulgar as he sounds. It's the lobby behind him that is. And so this is one of the reasons why we don't have effective action, because as a very fine book, Mansur Olson's Theory of Collective Action, told us 50 years ago, powerful concentrated groups can take over from the public good. And that is what impedes action. And the same is true at the global level. So your question is a very general one, but my answer to it is twofold. One is the technical side. There needs to be serious planning for the future because we need collective action over a sustained period to solve human problems. And second, in order to get that collective action, there needs to be a solution to politics. And the solution to politics means a solution to rent-seeking, special interests, or social divisions. And how do you overcome those? Well, history has shown that you need to keep inequalities within a narrow band, because if the inequalities get too vast, you break apart society one way or another. You need to prevent the political system from being corrupted, and so the anti-corruption part of politics is extremely strong. But the US legalized much of its corruption, so we have our royal family, King Donald and his princelings, they just are buying up, or not buying up, they're being handed over cryptocurrencies and properties and mining sectors. We're in the midst of a massive corruption period. Not even regarded as, I mean, it's regarded as a little bit strange, but nobody stops it because that's already the degradation of our political system. So, the answer to the question is it's not easy, and the world does not actually work well relative to goals. And so, the interesting feature of our world is that the goals that are set by the UN are actually quite good. You don't read, say, the Sustainable Development Goals and say, that's stupid. Or you don't read any treaty and say, that's ridiculous, how could they agree on that? Or you don't read the Paris Climate Agreement and say, what a joke. They're actually serious documents, well done, well designed. I don't have problems with the goals. And then the lack of action is inbuilt to a very important extent. And I can tell you one very key point about the international system, which is that the Sustainable Development Goals, which I work on, the 17 goals, were negotiated in a serious manner over 2.5 years at the UN. But there was almost no serious discussion whatsoever about how to achieve them. So the serious discussion, 95% was what should our goals be? And then almost everything was the nation states will tell us later what they're going to do to achieve them, not what should we do collectively to achieve them. And this is also true of the Paris Climate Agreement. All of the effort went to negotiating it. None of it went to how is it actually going to be implemented. And that's by design, because the powerful countries, starting with the United States, don't want to talk about implementation, because that requires responsibility to the international community. And powerful states, at least my own, the US, does not want accountability. The system is not designed for accountability. So it's a design incapacity to act. On university education, my advice is yes, because it's fun to know something. And the quality of our life is enhanced by education. I find it both exciting and mildly depressing that I've been at continuous education for more than 6 decades, and I learn basic things every day. I'm not absolutely sure whether it's because I forgot them before, but I'm pretty sure I'm actually learning something new and important. Important at the scale that I can't believe I didn't know that scale every day. So to my mind, this is just part of meaning of life, actually. We're thrust into a world of colors and spectacle and action that our brain takes a while to begin to understand. And then it takes us a lifetime to really try to understand how this world that we're in functions, whether it's the physical world or the social world. So to my mind, even if ChatGPT is better at a lot of this, the quality of my life is not served by just asking ChatGPT all the time for an answer, because I wouldn't even understand what it's saying without all the preparation and all the substrate to know what the hell it's talking about. Maybe that fundamentally doesn't matter and we should just go have a cup of coffee. But to my mind, it does matter for fundamental meaning and well-being that we understand the world that we're in. So this is other than the question of earning a living and how we are recompensed. Suppose the machines really can do everything we do want done in 20 or 30 years. Suppose that's really the case. Suppose that the value of labor falls effectively to zero. And suppose that we're smart enough that we all have basic income, so we're all having all the leisure time we want and all of the basic needs met, just as a thought experiment. In such a world, would there be a place for a university? Yes, in my view, it would be a wonderful culture center. It would be a place to understand the world. It would be like a museum. But if you go to a museum, you have impressions. It turns out it's hard what we're doing. It's hard to understand things. Nobody has figured out how to, the computer, your humanoid robot colleague that we'll have will learn all mathematics in a couple of hours of input of the basic code. But nobody has figured out for us how to cram all the mathematics we need from the beginning of basic everyday arithmetic to topology, real analysis, or whatever it is, other than in a 20-year period. No one's, except a couple of prodigies come along, but for the rest of us, we need to take a class each year, do the problems, go on to the next. It's very, very time consuming. Of course, it's too time consuming for what we actually now use it for, because it'll all be done a lot faster. But still, there's value in knowing those things, or certain aspects of those things, and that requires continuing knowledge. Universities will surely play a different role in the future from what they play right now. And I don't want to exaggerate. We're still going to need technical advances and all the technical training, and we're going to need human beings, I think, probably to solve problems for at least decades to come. And but for quality of life, I think this is an ongoing venture. Would be my guess. On the question of AI going from 30% to 60%, what I meant by the 30% is that we're just maybe 1/3 or less into this journey. Not that not that we're failing to extend it to enough users. So it's not the share of people using AI. All of us are using AI because anytime we're connected to any system, it's already AI empowered in some way. So we're all users of AI, whether we know it or not, from the moment we get up throughout the day. But in terms of what it means for society, I think maybe 20% of the way into this, because the changes will be very, very large, and they will take decades to unfold. It's a very huge question of what this means for global economic development, by the way. A very basic question in which I'm of two minds, and I don't know the answer. One is AI is a great converger. It's a massive leapfrog technology because AI, if well used, solves so many problems that otherwise are very difficult to solve. If poor countries today had to go through the whole evolution, say even of having physical banks invested around the countries, that's very expensive. We won't have banks, places where you actually have to go in to have a counter to do anything anymore. We barely do. We probably won't have paper currency. We won't have any of the physical appurtenances of a payment system other than virtual in the future. And that can be implemented incredibly fast in even the poorest places. And I like the fact that in India you can go to the most remote rural village and go to the poorest seller of a small mound of tomatoes on the street, and that person is getting paid electronically. That's an e-payment system already. They show you the barcode and you pay, and there's no cash transferred, and that's universal in India now. I think essentially universal. And that will come to Africa. It's already there to some extent, but it will come there within 10 years, that the issues of payments will not arise. Personal finance will be advanced fundamentally in this way. Healthcare will be fundamentally advanced because half of what healthcare is can be done online, either through remote sensing and monitoring, or through a doctor that's someplace else, or by calling for advice. So a lot of what is unavailable now will be essentially freely available to any poor person. And you used to need radiologists, and since most poor rural areas don't have radiologists, the idea of x-rays to do something was a goal, but not achievable. Now, at two levels, you don't need radiologists locally. One is that a radiologist anywhere in the world can read an image, so they can be anywhere, so that's not an issue. And second, of course, the expert systems will be better than the radiologists, and already are for many, many conditions. So healthcare will be transformed. Education, I think, will be fundamentally transformed. I think the personalized tutoring that can come from AI avatars online, I'm guessing will be very helpful, because we have a lot of examples of children that are being coached and tutored already on their math assignments. And it strikes me that this is a free way, actually, to do what is absolutely unavailable in many poor parts of the world. To have qualified teachers that can actually give you personalized instruction. You just need a device and a data system. That doesn't exist right now, but it's not any kind of physical or cost barrier. So I've asked Huawei, for example, in one country in Africa where I'm working, please just give me the national model. We'll take it to the government, we'll find out how much it costs, we'll get someone to finance this, so that every child can have a device, everybody can be online, and we can start implementing these solutions. So all of that is the positive side that I think is very powerful. The negative side is that there's no such thing as labor-intensive development anymore. So the traditional model, Singapore to a little bit of an extent followed it, and Hong Kong even, but other places that didn't have the ports and the entrepot services had to completely depend on it. You had to, it was, the first step was sewing clothing, or putting things on a motherboard and so forth. And that was a stepping stone. I once had a professional disaster because I was in a room and I was trying to explain this, and I said in a quip, we don't need less sweatshops, we need more sweatshops. Meaning that this is how development gets started in the poorest places, of people sewing clothing together. And of course, someone posted that, and Professor Sachs says we need more sweatshops, and I spent 40 years trying to explain that line. So just to say, don't post anything, misunderstanding me. But that whole development path is gone. There is no labor-intensive development path anymore. So the question that is the core question for development is, what do I sell? Because I need to buy hardware. I need to buy infrastructure. I need to pay back some loans. What am I going to sell? And if you can answer that question for a representative impoverished country, you've got the answer to development, because everything else then will fall into place. If you know what to sell, I can tell you what to buy. Buy an AI system, buy digital devices for your children, make sure that you have universal connectivity, get the apps that you need, because that will all be leapfrogging for you. But you're going to have to pay back something on that. So it could be minerals, and so maybe one of the main courses for development is stop letting foreign multinationals rip off your minerals and get a grip on what you can sell. It could be the same with agricultural commodities, so it could be commodities. It could be tourism. It could be expat work. It could be many things, but to my mind, the basic issue of development is I have to buy some hardware and software, and I need to pay it back in 25 years. I need to get someone to lend me that money so that I can get the infrastructure built, and I'm not going to be able to do it in the traditional way that was done before. And that is the basic question of development. But AI on the whole is a net plus, significant net plus for development.
Thank you. So the next three, the gentleman one, and Khalid, and the lady here.
Hi Jeff, my name is Elliot Pressy Freeman. I'm a professor of anthropology at NUS, our sister university here. But I also did your program, the MPAID, at Harvard back in the day.
Which date?
This was 2011 I finished,
great.
so with my aunt Mercado.
Yeah.
And it drove me crazy, into anthropology. And I say that as a preface to ask you of your own intellectual evolution over time.
Yeah.
Because the person who led the MPAID program, who started it, and the person who's sitting here telling us pretty radical anti-imperialist and maybe even anti-capitalist messages are two quite different people.
Yeah.
And I want to put on the table something that's been implicit in your commentary, which is communism, which is Marxism. We've mentioned Marx before. As many times as I go over the current conjuncture, the concentration of capital and the ability for it to capture political processes, it seems to me that liberalism is done. It can no longer contain its own internal contradictions. It's destroying the planet. It's abusing people. And now with the AI revolution, there are no paths to development, as we learned in that very technocratic program at the NPAID so many years ago, and the one that you did. So I'd like to ask you kind of directly, you know, the founder of shock therapy in the USSR that dismantled the Soviet system. Do we need to go back to something, maybe not like that, because it was pretty disastrous in a lot of ways, but a system that no longer exploits labor, destroys the planet, abuses people, genocides Gaza, as it has done?
Yeah, good.
Okay, my name is...
Okay.
Okay, my name is Syed Islam. I am environmental sociologist here at NTU. I teach some of your ideas in a class, for example, in like clinical economics and so on. I'm sure your work has some impact on you on that particular aspect. Anyway, my question is kind of also broader, and perhaps to some extent connected with the earlier question. given the world system that you just touched on, as well as the fact that we are facing an existential threat because of climate change, and also the current levels of consumption are unsustainable, inequitable, and inaccessible to majority of the humans, what is the prospect for a sustainable planet? Should we continue remaining some kind of pessimistic? Is there any optimism? What do you think?
Right.
Hi, Professor Sachs. Firstly, I would like to thank you for being a voice of moral clarity in the US, for your stances on Palestine and Israel. I know in the US it's much harder. I don't know how you get away with it. And that is related to my question basically. For many of us in the global south, maybe Singapore is a bit different, but it's changing as well. It's obvious what is happening there, and it's obvious who is right and who is wrong, and whether it's a genocide, whether there's breach of international law. But somehow in the US, it's not as obvious. And my question is, other than the Israeli lobby, other than APEC, is there a reason? Or you think that is the main one? Or is it as simple as racism or Orientalism? Thank you.
The lady. Yes, the one before. Yeah.
Hello, Prof. Sachs. Thank you so much. It was wonderful listening to you all this while. My question is about how quickly. So, yes, I'm Akshaya. I'm a PhD student here in economics at NTU. So my question is about the rapidly developing frontier technology space. So how do you see the tension between how quickly technological advancements are going on and the heavy demands that it puts on our environment? Say, for example, in AI chips or semiconductors, their demands on water and very pure distilled water is too much that I find it so difficult to grasp, how are we going to grapple with this in the coming future? So what do you think major stakeholders should do or account for as countries are vying for technological supremacy as they try to keep building further and further new technologies? Thank you.
Thank you. You have 4 questions, but you only have 10 minutes. Unless you want to go over that.
Okay. Well, these are big and very important questions. I'll speak about my personal journey very briefly, although I would have hours that I'd like to add. My view consistently for my whole sentient lifetime as someone involved in these issues, which goes back more than 50 years now, is that I have always viewed the question of how can we get to a world that is at shared prosperity and peaceful. So those are have been my long-standing aims. I was inspired by 2 ideas that are fundamental in my view. One is Adam Smith's idea in what I regard as the most interesting paragraph of The Wealth of Nations. He says, and I don't have the quote exactly in front of me because it's a long paragraph, but he says that the 2 most significant events in the history of mankind are the discovery of the routes, the voyage routes to the East and the West Indies. And he says these have united the whole world and by their nature should have raised the well-being of the whole world. But at the time that they occurred, Europe had such predominant power that it actually rendered the native populations into misery, in fact. And he says what will happen in the future, however, is that this open, interconnected world will, by nature of the transmission of knowledge and ideas, give rise to increased power in those native places in the East and the West, and lead eventually to a new balance of he says, a new justice based on a new balance of force, an equality of force. It's an unbelievably wise statement written in 1776, and I think we're living that vision, basically, that the open world basically has led to Asia's recovery from essentially European imperialism, which began intensively in the 19th century, early 19th century, earlier in India, and that we are rebalancing the world in a way that can be shared in prosperity and shared in power. The second idea that was fundamental for me was John Maynard Keynes, writing in 1919 in a book called The Economic Consequences of the Peace. And he basically said victors should be nice to vanquished, because what goes around comes around, and if you are harsh when you're on top, you will suffer the boomerang effect later on. So, to paraphrase, I apologize, don't be an asshole. You know, be pleasant and don't misbehave. So, honest to goodness, whatever one thinks or hears about what I believe and don't believe, that's what I believed my whole life. And my job, I always believed, was to help poor countries catch up. And I didn't know very much at the beginning, but I started in Latin America in the middle of the 1980s, and then in Eastern Europe at the end of the 1980s, then in the former Soviet Union in the early 1990s, then working in India and China from the mid-1990s, and working in Africa from the mid-1990s. So I got to know all different parts of the world, and basically been to almost every place, in not every country, but countries with about 95% of the world population at this point. So, what have I learned from this? First, just to put aside a shock therapy issue, I was never a market fundamentalist, ever once for a moment. I was raised in Cambridge, Massachusetts, under the idea of mixed economy and public goods of Paul Samuelson. So my intellectual formation was we need markets and we need the state. And Richard Musgrave and Paul Samuelson and others that were my fundamental influences meant that I avoided every bit of extremism of Chicago economics. So there was never that. Shock therapy, so-called, was not a term I gave, but it was a specific set of actions about financial crises that got translated by the media into some bizarre ideas. You use specific measures to end a hyperinflation. You don't do that gradually over 25 years. But ending a hyperinflation is not economic development, it's just ending a hyperinflation. So certain things you do quickly, other things you do slowly. I've never been so stupid as to misunderstand that. And so a lot of what's said about these things are wrong. I was attacked for what I advised in the Soviet Union and Russia for exactly the opposite of what I said. What I said in 1990 was help the Soviet Union. What I said in Russia in 1992 was help Russia. That's what I learned from Keynes. Help these countries, they're in financial distress, they need help to not suffer a massive crisis in this revolutionary transformation that they're experiencing. And I was not listened to. Then at one point, the advisor to Clinton, Strobe Talbot, who then became the head of the Brookings Institution, said, Russia needs less shock, more therapy. I'll apply the term asshole to that. Why? Because Clinton did nothing to help. You want therapy? Help them. Idiotic. But I got attributed to a lot of the opposite of what I said. So I've not changed my general moral outlook or my substantive belief about mixed economy. That I believed all along. The difference is I know a heck of a lot more now than I did 50 years ago. And as I said, every day I learn something where I'm shocked that I didn't know it the day before. But I've not changed the basic parameters, which is have a mixed system and be nice to others. Those are my two precepts for how to achieve economic development, and nothing of that has changed for me. Now, what has changed is a darkening view of the United States for sure. This definitely is true. And the reason is, when I was a young person, I was proud. I'm an American. I can help the world. That was literally my mindset, by the way, in the early 1980s. And once in a while, the United States US government did something good. Usually, I'd argue a lot in the case I was working on. So in Bolivia, I said, you have to cancel the debt. You have to cancel the debt. That's not shock therapy. That's help them. That's what I learned from Keynes. I said, don't have these debts. You've got to cancel them. And they did, because it was a small place and it was costless for them. And then when I went to Poland, I said, cancel their debts. They have Soviet-era debts. Cancel them to give them a fresh start. And the White House agreed with me. I didn't quite understand why. I thought because I was giving them good advice. But it was in fact not bad advice, but Poland was to be the new frontier of NATO. So it was not only economically sound, but it was politically acceptable to Washington. When I said the same thing for Russia, it was economically sound, but politically not acceptable. And so it was explained to me by his Secretary of State, Lawrence Eagleburger, even if I agree with you, it's not going to happen. And that I could not process properly, because I could not really accept that we were still in a geopolitical war in 1992 after the Soviet Union had ended. I thought we were now in a world of peace, and Russia's recovery would be a good thing. I also could not imagine the United States would actively try to block China's economic well-being. So in that sense, I'm naive, because China's rise to me has been a wonderful thing for the world, not a bad thing. Whereas some people say the biggest mistake the United States ever made was to let China in the WTO. To my mind, it was one of the best things the US did. China's 1.4 billion people, living standards have been raised. My God, that's the whole purpose of what we're doing. How could that be bad? Well, it's bad because the US can't dictate everything in the world. But how could that be good for the US to dictate everything? It's just 4.1% of the world population. So what has changed for me is 40 years of working with the US government. And you could say, well, was I stupid then? I would say I was definitely more ignorant then. But the difference is also the US has become nastier and degraded institutionally. So partly this is also change in the US. When I grew up, I was still growing up in the shadow of what Franklin Roosevelt created. A United Nations, multilateralism, good neighbor policy, the idea of helping. The Marshall Plan I thought was an absolutely 100% great thing. It also funded CIA operations in Europe, something I only learned 20 years after learning about the Marshall Plan. But still, on balance, by the way, was still a good thing. So that was the milieu that I was counting on, that the United States would be a positive, constructive force in the world. I do not regard the United States as a positive, constructive force in the world today. I think it has changed. Why has it changed? No. Well, partly. Why has it changed? I think there are three parts of what has changed. One is that the military-industrial state that Eisenhower warned us about in 1961 became the U.S. state. We became an imperium. That's not capitalism, that's an imperium. And that, yeah, sorry, that's an imperium. That is it also relates to military contractors and all the rest, but it is an imperium. That is number one. Second, the politics became utterly corrupted. That's not inherent, because there are places where politics is not corrupted. But in the United States, it is true that the politics starting in the 1970s became consciously corrupted by Supreme Court decisions. But this is quite different in some other countries. So the United States didn't inevitably have to become corrupted, but it became massively corrupted politically. And the third is, like in many places, America was born as a racist society. It remains a racist society, but it remains less of a racist society because the demography is changing dramatically, and we're at the end of the white backlash era. And I hope that Zoran Mamdani will be mayor of New York, and that will be a very notable fact we hope in just a few days, because America was almost 90% white Christian in 1950, as late as that, 80+%. And now it's 55% white non-Hispanic, actually. And it will be less than 50% by the 2040s. So this is another dimension of all of this. And America's in crisis right now. It needs to reform internally, and it needs to learn to live with the rest of the world. And there's a race going on. One is that if we remain peaceful, reality will take hold. America tried to have a trade war with China. China stopped them. There can be no trade war. They're begging for relief because China has the upper hand now. And that's fine. So America needs to learn. It can't just dictate. On the other hand, it wants to maintain the power that it once had, so that's dangerous. And the second point is, as I said, the concentration of power in the United States is increasing because of the technological revolution. So we're in a race. Is it Mamdani or is it Elon Musk that will run, and Peter Thiel that will run the United States in the future? We don't know. This is actually our drama going forward. So this, I think, is, and that relates to the, sorry, we could go on forever and I'll stop, but can we make a sustainable planet? If you put your economic policy board to work, not at the level of Singapore, but at the level of the world, and said, please design a sustainable planet, it is feasible. I spent 25 years on scenario building of different kinds, clean energy system, ending poverty. There's no obstacle. There's not a single problem we face that requires 10% of world output to accomplish. All of these are problems of 2 to 5% of world GDP. Ending poverty is maybe 1% of world GDP, ending extreme poverty. So we're not talking about anything that is outside of the resource constraints of the world. We're talking about politics, collective action, politics in the broad sense. So design the solutions, show why it's better for all parts of the world, and then the political struggle is to overcome specific interests, is the main political struggle. China's rise is not bad for America. It's actually almost not bad for anybody in America. But if it was bad for a small part of the American workforce, help them. That's the point. That's the first thing we teach in trade theory. Not everybody benefits from open trade, but everybody can be made to benefit. It can be Pareto improving. That's the second day. The first day is their gains from trade. The second day is not everybody wins. The third day is the winners can compensate the losers. That's the lesson of International Trade 101. We need to apply that. And if you apply that at the global level, a sustainable planet in which everybody is prospering is technically feasible within resource boundaries and is win-win with a few transfers. And of course, and this is the practical struggle. This is where ideas come into play, I think, which is showing those points. We're not politicians. I'm not a politician, and I depend. I mean, my theory of change is show the way, show that it's better, and help to make politics then do that as best as possible. There's no guarantee that that approach works, but that's, I think, at least from a scholar's point of view, or a technocrat's point of view, right. Singapore short circuits that because the technocrats are in charge. In the United States, the technocrats are not in charge. We don't have a single PhD in our cabinet. Out of the 35 cabinet level members, we have one STEM master's degree, one out of 35, and not a single PhD in any field in the US cabinet. Wow, that's what we're trying to talk to. That's hard, by the way, and we have no planning agency, no planning ministry, and no desire to cooperate. So that is the practical obstacles right now. We just have a government that is both mean and incompetent at the same time. It's not even mean and competent. Maybe it's better to be mean and incompetent because the damage will be less. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. So, unfortunately, the time is up. So, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, Professor Sachs, Professor Eko, for this very insightful event. Thank you for sharing with us a lot of your personal insights. I have a lot of questions, but I'll reserve it for the afternoon session. But I can't help but asking you just one.
Yes.
You know, our economics department, we have a lot of behavioral economists. And listening to you, all the presentations, you'll always be very, decisive, rational, logical analysis, and so on. So I just wonder, what's your view on behavioral economics?
I guess I would say the following things. First, behavioral economics is economists discovering what everyone else knew for a long time, which is that Homo economicus is not the right model of our psychology. And again, my favorite philosopher is Aristotle. And Aristotle's basic idea, he and Plato said we have divided psyches, and you'll remember in Plato the charioteer trying to drive 3 horses. One is completely wild, one is well-tamed, the third has a lot of energy and can be steered. And this was the metaphor for our minds. Passion, reason, and thymus, which is will. And Aristotle said we have a vegetative part of our minds, which is reproduction and eating and so forth, very instinctive. We have an animal part of our minds, which is that we react to stimuli, and we have a rational part of our mind. Now we say the same language, roughly, except now we say we have a prefrontal cortex, we have an amygdala, we have a reward center system in the dorsal striatum, but it's the same idea. We have several networks in our brain, and the one that Aristotle recommended was the downward path from the prefrontal cortex to control the amygdala, basically. Don't let fear dominate, but rather let rational cognition and planning and reward calculation tame the emotional responses. So Aristotle wasn't neutral among the three. He said, think. His main idea was think before you act, if I could summarize Aristotle. And rationality was the idea. When I said to Danny Kahneman, who's a wonderful person, and he had the fast and the slow, I said, Danny, we need to train people to overcome the fast responses and the biases. He said, that's impossible. I was surprised, but he said, no, you can't do that. You can tell the graduate students about it, don't reach for the big bowl, and don't do all the things that is the fast system, but they'll do it anyway. This is where I disagree with, this is one area where I hope he may be right, but I hope that he's wrong, which is I believe that rationality can be trained, and that it's not automatic, it's just a potential. So we should be training good thinking. Second, I don't like nudging. I don't like the idea that we solve other people's problems by putting them in managed situations where we trick them to do the right thing. Rather than giving the default mechanism this one so that they save or don't save, I would rather that we are consciously trying to instill the values, think ahead, save for the future, and believe that, again, rationality-based education is the right approach. So with behavioral economics, we're learning a lot about the psyche, about behavior and so forth, but I regard my maintained assumption, which may be false, but my maintained assumption is we can learn to think better. And we should use behavioral economics normatively, not to nudge people as the best we can do is for Cass Sunstein to set the rules so that I behave in the right way, but rather that we say, look, we have all these tendencies, let's reason together, let's avoid this. So then I'll come to an example. It's not exactly behavioral economics, but it's experimental game theory, which I regard as extremely helpful and extremely important. I love one result in game theory above all results in experimental game theory. And that is, it's actually two results. One, if you put people into a one-shot prisoner's dilemma, they cooperate half the time, roughly. If you put nurses into a one-shot prisoner's dilemma, they cooperate almost all the time. If you put economics students, they cooperate 10% of the time. And so it is a question with economic students, is it trained in capacity or self-selection? This is the big debate. I think that there's a lot of trained in capacity to this. You learn that rationality is you defect. Whereas in nursing, you of course know rationality is you cooperate. So this is one part of experimental result that I like, which is people cooperate more than game theory predicts. Game theory predicts 0, but people cooperate half the time. Now the result that I really love is that if you let people have pre-play communication, pure cheap talk, technically, no binding commitments, no nothing, but you let the people talk and then you let them play, cooperation is 90% plus. My God, we're human beings. Isn't that interesting? It is interesting, actually. I don't even know why that's so exactly, but it's intuitively right to me. And so what I keep say to the European leaders is sit down and talk to Putin. Are you crazy? I'm called a Putin apologist for this. But my idea is if two people talk, they'll reach a cooperative outcome much better than if they don't talk. And so I think that behavioral economics can be made to be a normative field. In general, I don't accept the idea of positive economics as being our main goal. I like to think of economics as a field of ethics, which is that ethics is the science of a good life, and economics should be the science of a good material life. And so it should help to solve the problems, not only to observe the behavior. For Milton Friedman, he wrote in 1953 in The Methodology of Positive Economics that the highest aim of economics is prediction. Now, predicting World War III or predicting an economic collapse is not so much value, but preventing those is of a lot of value. So I like the behavioral economics as my bottom line a lot, but I want to use it in a particular way, which is to help us understand ourselves so that we can do better. And I want to use game theory not to say, well, prisoners' dilemmas go wrong. I want to use game theory to say, look, there's a trap here, but through cooperation we can do much better, so let's think of all the ways we can enforce the cooperative outcome as the normative end of game theory.
Well, thank you very much.
I won't ask you where does President Trump fits in.
In the afternoon.
Thank you very much.